speaker for today, as you know, is John Gallagher. And the speaker we're going to have for next month will be, well, the whole session for November is going to be put on by the police department. They said I won't have to do anything. It's going to be a Zoom type situation. And they're putting it on, it's going to be some type of forecast from Massachusetts Wildlife. So anyway, so that will be for November, the wildlife presentation by the police. And anyone have any questions or anything you want to say before we go further?
Probably just to mention about December, just to mention. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'd like to mention that I don't know how many people knew John Campbell. John Campbell was a person that did enormous work here in Halifax. He was on many types of committees. I served with John Campbell 7 years when he was on the, when he was the chairman of the building committee. And at that time, was when we was trying to get a council on aging building or a lot of land to build on. Nothing seemed to work out for years. And John, he put a lot of hours in it. So it's a shame that to see it had to happen so quickly. But it's the way life goes. So you just remember John Campbell. Anything else? We have the fire chief here today. Oh, speaking of the fire chief, I finally saw something quickly on the board. You have some type of a presentation of the fire station this month?
We have our open house on the 13th, I believe 14th, well, 14th, which is a Saturday. We have open house.
But the open house, is it open house?
Open house, correct, yes.
When is it going to be?
Saturday, I believe Saturday the 14th. Let me just look at my phone, make sure I've got the correct date. But I believe it is the 14th. So it is the 14th. Saturday the 14th is open house, so anybody's welcome. We'll have stuff there for the kids to do. We'll have some food there. It's basically the opportunity for the residents to come in and see what we have in the station, what we have for equipment, the condition of our equipment. Meet the personnel that work there. Just gives an opportunity to the public to come in and see what we have going on. So everybody's welcome.
Yeah, good. Okay, so what number?
Do you know what time it is?
I will confirm that, but I believe it's 10 to 2.
Okay.
Yes.
So it'll be for the full day, won't it?
No, it's not. It's only a couple hours. I believe 10 to 2, but I will confirm that. I will let you know. I should know, but I've got a ton of stuff going on, so.
I just happened to see it. I went by, but you can't drive and look at all these signs you have.
Yeah.
But it said something about October, I thought.
Yeah, we have the open house, which, last year we had quite a few people that came down, had a great day. So everybody is welcome.
Well, other than that, we'll put John Gallagher right on. John Gallagher, I didn't have too much time with him this morning when I interviewed this. John has been doing books, I don't know how many years, John?
Let's see, 15 years now. 15 years? Yeah.
And you have a program sometime for the farmers market?
I do. I come down to the Halifax farmers market and talk to people and sell my books and sign my books. And yeah, meet a lot of nice people.
Good. Okay, then I'll let you take it from here and do whatever you want. It's your hour.
Oh, okay, thank you, Ken. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Let me start off just to give you a little bit about my background. I was a Boston policeman for more than 30 years. And during that time, I rose through the ranks, did all kinds of different work, patrol, investigation. Most of my career was spent in drug control. I was a squad leader in a drug control unit and also became the commander of the entire drug control unit for the police departments. About 150 men and women operated citywide. And after doing that for about 3 years, the police commissioner promoted me to chief of detectives. And I served as his superintendent, as a member of the command staff for 8 years before I retired. My very last assignment was citywide commander of night operations. So it was an interesting career, and if I had the time, I could tell you, I'm sure, quite a few stories. I'm sure you'd enjoy hearing. But I retired. When I retired, I actually did some more work. I did some consulting work, and security work, and so forth. But I started doing something that I really love, and local history has always been one of my favorites. Any kind of history, actually. But I found out about a murder that happened in Hanover, where I live. I picked up a book, this Images of America. You might have seen the book yourselves. It's old-time pictures of towns, various towns throughout the area, to show you what life was like way back when. And I came across a picture of a house on Broadway in Hanover. Somebody had scratched across the front of it, 3 Irishmen shot here by Steph Perry in 1845. Well, that really interested me because besides history, I love genealogy, and I've done a lot of work researching my own family. And of course, with my Irish background, I read about the 3 Irishmen being killed. I said, I have to look into this. So I went down to the Plymouth Public Library, and on microfilm, we had the Old Colony Memorial, and we had the entire story of what happened. It seems that the Irishmen were part of a gang that were building the railroad from Boston to Plymouth, and they reached the town of Hanson. And on St. Patrick's Day, they heard about a rum shanty on Broadway in Hanover, so they decided to drop their tools and go over and have a little celebration. So they went over to this illegal rum shanty run by a guy by the name of Steph Perry. And there was quite a bit of drinking going on. And before you know it, they were in a tussle with one of the local men. And the fight spilled out outside the shanty. And Perry came out with a shotgun and killed 2 of the Irish laborers, who happened to be brothers. He wounded a 3rd man who tried to run away. Eventually, Seth Perry was arrested, and they brought him to trial. He ended up doing 13 years in Charlestown State Prison for manslaughter. It was funny because one of the things I love about these books when I'm researching them is there's a lot of legal history in them. In this, of course, when I heard about this murder, back in the day in 1845, if you were found guilty of murder, you immediately faced the gallows. So capital punishment was an issue even back in those days. And the other part of it was that a man's house is his castle is one of the defenses that his wife wanted him. And they convinced the jury that Perry was not only just operating this rum shanty, but he was actually living in the shanty. So because it was his house, he was protecting his house and was justified in murdering the 2 Irishmen who had started the fight inside the place, which I thought was very interesting. So Perry was arrested, he did the time, and then as I was researching this crime, I found out about 2 other murders that happened in Hanover. One in 1874 and one in 1904. And with the help of the Historical Society and other research that I did, I finally published my first book, Murder on Broadway. And it went over so well, people were so interested in it, I started to look into other murders around Plymouth County. And eventually, I wrote 4 books, including this one, Monument to Grief. What I like most about writing the books is the research. Some people aren't all that happy about research, but for me it was almost like a investigating case, being a detective, digging up all the facts about exactly what happened. So I really started to get into it, and my second book I looked into was a 1913 murder at Assinippi, which is part of Norwell. It actually shared with Norwell and Hanover. And a retired Rear Admiral from the Navy was found dead in his bed one morning. And when they did an autopsy on his body, they found out that he had enough arsenic in him to kill 6 horses. Naturally, the investigation really took off, and eventually the wife of the admiral was arrested for his murder. From there, I started to look into this Halifax case. It's a triple murder in 1874. At a little farmhouse that stands on 105 to this day. I actually went out to the house to speak to the people who lived there because I didn't want to surprise them with this book about a murder that happened inside the place. I said, I just want to give you a fair warning, I'm looking into this murder. Oh, we know all about it, you're welcome to come in. So they invited me in, and the place had actually been restored to what it looked like in 1874. So they took me around the inside of the house, and I went into one of the bedrooms, and hanging on the wall was a picture taken from the rear of the place, looking into the back of the house. And I realized suddenly that it was an actual crime scene photograph from 1874 that was used during the trial. And you'll see that picture here on my presentation. But they were thrilled that I was going to write about the murder in the house because they all kind of, they loved the history of the house as it was, but just to find out that there was a murder there and then, have a book written about it, they were excited. So anyway, let me just go through my my little spiel here on the monument to her grief. And when I used this title, I found a newspaper article that actually referred to the house that's still standing on 105 as Halifax's monument, or that the house was a monument to Halifax's grief over the murder that had occurred. Just to give you an idea, I'll go through these real quickly. Some of the research that I do, places that I look for information. And the internet, of course, is a huge resource of information. I go through ancestry. One of the things I do with all of my books is I research the history of the people that are involved, just to find out a little bit more about their lives. Then, of course, libraries, historical societies, and archives. And then, of course, I consult all kinds of books to find out, the history of what was life, contemporary life there at the time of murder, and some of the issues that were addressed, as I mentioned before, about the death penalty, and of course the history of all of that town, and some of the medical history, the legal medical area of some of these crimes that were investigated back in the day. Massachusetts State Archives is an incredible source, and they're very, very helpful. I've consulted with them on a number of occasions, and they actually have a lot of prison records and have so much information, even the ledgers and so forth, to tell you what kind of clothing people were wearing when they first brought to the prison, their prison number, the physical description. I mean, just if you really want to dig, there's so much information you can find. So our story starts here. It was in February 1874, and this house is still on High Street, called Zero High Street, not too far from the railroad depot there in Hanson. There was a little store that stood next to the railroad depot, and it's now replaced by a place by Dunkin' Donuts. Anyway, the fellow that lived there, William Sturger, a young man in his 20s, he had one child, and his wife was expecting a second. He was a struggling father. He was trying to raise his family, but had very little income. He was a shoemaker. He worked in Abington. Would take the train sometimes from the house in Hanson to Abington to work. But on many occasions he had to walk because he had no money. Oops. Well, this is Sturger. And I have to thank Susan Basile from the Historical Commission. She had a wealth of information there at the museum. She was able to dig up this photograph of Sturgeon. And he was missing fingers on his left hand because he was using an axe, I guess, once to kill some chickens, and he chopped off one of his fingers. So Sturgeon left his house on the night of February 15th. And on his way to Elm Street, he stopped by this place, Luther King's house, and stole a card stick from one of the carts that were out there on the front lawn. He continued his walk down Elm Street towards Halifax until he got to Pine Street. And he went down Pine Street right by Daniel Blake's house, and the house is still there. Daniel Blake was his wife. Daniel Blake's wife was Sturtevant's aunt. So Sturtevant made his way to the Blake house, and then there was a trail that went behind, opposite the house, went through the woods and over to the back of the Sturtevant place. Just another view of the map that shows how he made it. So it was about a 3-mile walk, and it was a cold night. He walked by this house at Elm Street and Fern Street. Somebody might recognize that house. That was Edward Hingley's house. He was a selectman here in Halifax. And this is the Blake house on Pine Street. So this is what, of course this is daytime, but this is what Sturtevant would have seen as he came out of the woods and emerged from that path that led to the Sturtevant house from the Blake house. This was another photograph that was available at the museum, and I was thrilled to get this. But obviously, these are all crime scene photographs that were taken at the time of the murder. And this is the back of the house. You can see the policeman standing in the back of the house. And moving the bed out, one of the beds that one of the victims was lying in was taken out of the house. And this is one of the victims' bedrooms. And as, of course, you can see the blood stains on the pillow on the wall. This was Simeon Sturtevant, one of 2 brothers that were murdered that particular night. Both of them were in their 70s. They were very, very wealthy. They did not trust banks. They kept all of their money hidden in the house. In fact, they had money that had never been circulated before, including Civil War script, they called it, paper bills and coins and so forth. This is just a view of the front of the house. And a lot of you, I'm sure, recognize the house that still stands on 105. Just past, from 106 down 105, just past the cemetery on the left. If you get on a little bit further on the right-hand side towards Middleborough, you'll see the house. It's kind of kitty corner on the street. This is the house pretty much as it looks like today. There was a professor, a non-professor, I guess, from Bridgewater State College at the time, who bought the property. Some of you may even remember his name, I'm not sure. But he wanted to restore the house to exactly what it looked like in 1874, and that's the house I went into to visit, that they told the current owners about my book. Just another view away from there. And this is a crime scene sketch a friend of mine from the police department put together to kind of show you the tracks that the killer took. So he came to the house and he went into the back porch and he was confronted by Thomas Sturtevant. And this was the connection was that he was his granduncle, the murderer's uncle. And when he surprised Thomas, who was going out with some meal for some of the cows, and he hit him with a stake and killed him. He then went inside the house to find Simeon, found him in the bedroom, and killed him while he lay in his bed. He then went through the whole place looking for money, stuffed his pockets with whatever he could find, and went outside and happened to notice the maid who was working in the house, outside the house, coming back from the barn where the cows were kept. She saw him with the stake in his hand and started running. He caught up to her just before she could get to the trail. She was trying to get back to the Daniel Blake house with some help. And he murdered her there on the trail. This is Stephen Love. And Stephen Love, the next morning, was going up to Daniel Blake's house. He was coming from his house on 106 to have his shoemaker's tool sharpened. So Daniel was walking down 105 towards the Sturdivant house and came to the path that leads to Blake's house and came across the body of a woman who was murdered on the trail. He naturally went across the street and alerted all the neighbors. Everybody came over, and the lady across the street, whose name was Holmes, Linda Holmes, happened to recognize the woman who was murdered. From there, they sent help for the local constable. His name was Crocker, and they also sent for Daniel Blake to come and take a look at what was going on. They all went inside the house. This is Lowell's house at 563 Plymouth Street. And this is Daniel and Margaret Sturdivant Blake, rather. Margaret, as I mentioned, was the murderer's aunt. So, now the police have been contacted. They come to start their investigation. And they find out about a conversation that the uncles had with young Sturdivant, the nephew, who was in need of money and wanted to ask them for a loan, but they refused to give it to him. He was a problem ever since he was a child. He had spent time in a reform school, and he had also been sent to the Navy, and he deserted from the Navy during the Civil War. He was arrested several times. He had done prison time in Bridgewater. Oh, well, I should say Bridgewater, at Plymouth. For stealing a horse. He stole a horse from a local neighbor and tried to sell it in Boston, and he was arrested there, brought back to Plymouth and tried, and was sentenced for several years to prison. Let me go back to this. So anyway, like I mentioned, he went inside. Now, inside the house, there was actually a parrot. And from what I understand, as the story grew over the years from 1874, was passed on from generation to generation, the story became that once the police got to the house, the parrot was actually a talking parrot, and the parrot gave up the name of the murderer to the police. I did a presentation over at the museum in Halifax, and there had been quite a bit of advertising about it. A lot of Sturdivant descendants actually came to the presentation, and we had a great laugh about it because a lot of them remembered the story, haven't heard it, haven't been passed down all these years. It was amazing. A lot of them came from all over the country to come and listen to the talk and buy the books, and they were amazed at how much information I got about it. And they always wondered what the true story was about what had happened. And when they realized that I had done all that research and figured it all out, they were pleased. But they all laughed about the parrot and the story about him giving up the name. So anyway, now this fellow Sturdivant he's made good his escape at night. The next morning the bodies are found. The police started their investigation. And they mentioned that they had, someone mentioned that they had overheard the conversation about him in need of money. Well, as they started to expand around the neighborhood and interview a lot of different people, they came to a store, to a fellow by the name of Drayton. And he told them that they had, Sturdivant himself, the murderer, had come into the store and had owed him money and paid him back, and paid him with brand new Civil War script. So they realized that that script was more than likely taken from the Sturdivant house during the robbery. So they started to focus on Sturdivant. They went to his house, and before they did, this is hard to believe, but back even then, in those days, 1874, there was a forensic type of investigation, and they found a mud print from his boot in the trail. They protected that mud print, and they made a mold of it. And on the soled shoe, there was a patch that had been placed. Well, when they went to the Sturdivant house to confront him about the murder at 0 High Street, They searched his house, and sure enough, they found a boot that was an exact match to the mud print that was in the trail. So the case continued to mount against him. The evidence just kept piling up, and they finally made the arrest and brought him to Plymouth jail. During the investigation, of course, there was a funeral, and the funeral took place from the Sterling house. All three of the victims were laid to rest from the house in the cemetery. Although the woman was buried actually down in, there's a cemetery down here if you're going towards Plimpton. It's in Plimpton. You can hardly see it. It's kind of overgrown with grass and shrubs and so forth. But she's buried there, and they took them by wagon, and there were actually, I think maybe a dozen pallbearers that marched alongside the wagon up to the cemetery there on Route 105. And at the top of the hill, those two Sterling brothers were buried. And their markers are still up there. This is something I had never seen before in all my research over the years at these different cemeteries. To see that somebody had actually wrote "murdered" on a gravestone. If you ever decide to take a walk up there and look at the cemetery, you'll see if you're looking at the cemetery on the right-hand side, way up on the hill, you'll see those two markers. And believe it or not, to the left of both of those markers is an unmarked grave, and that belongs to the murderer, William Sturman. They had no place else to put them, so they decided to bury him right next to his victims. This is Drayton's store. This is the fellow who revealed to the police that Sturman owed him money and showed them the script that he took from the place. And I found this store, it's no longer there, of course, in Southampton. It's been replaced by the Dunkin' Donuts. It's there right near the depot. But this still does exist. It's over by the Greenbury Airport, right on their property. That house is still there. And this is the infamous murderer. He was taken to Plymouth County jail after his trial. He was found guilty, and he was sentenced to hang. And they took him out to the gallows right in it was built right inside the prison. And they had so many people that wanted to witness the execution that the sheriff had to issue tickets to keep the number of people down. But he was executed and brought back to Halifax, where he was buried, as I mentioned before, next to the two of his victims. But that's pretty much it. That's the story of the 1874 murder. Any questions?
Yeah. Did they ever figure out how much money they actually died for? Just out of
I don't know if they actually had an exact amount. There were a lot of coins. There was a lot of paper currency, but I don't think they ever came up with the exact amount. All they know is that they found money that matched, what they had previously kept in the house, and that, obviously that became an important piece of evidence during the trial. Anyone else have a question? Yes.
Of the books you wrote, any of them unsolved?
No, they're all solved. Yeah. My most recent book, it's about a murder of Hingham postmaster in 1857. They've all been solved, and I almost kind of wish that I could find one that wasn't solved, that I could write about, and maybe try to solve it 100 years later. That'd be pretty fantastic. But I don't think that'll ever happen. I mean, and it's funny too, because a lot of people ask me if I'll write about more recent murders, and I kind of stay away from them, only because I don't want to upset a lot of the people that are still surviving. I'd rather stick with the 100-year-old murders, and which can be, good and bad, only because I can't interview any of the people from way back then to tell me how, what happened, how did it happen, and everything else. But the beauty of it was that when I found out that these stories were in the newspapers, every newspaper in those days used to send a reporter to the trial, and they would write down word for word every response every witness made. So it really gave me a great, clear picture of what happened. And then I would supplement it with all the other information that I mentioned before, with archives records and museum records and historical society records and so forth, to get a clearer picture of everything. I kind of started out when I was first writing. It's more or less preparing a case for the district attorney to bring before the grand jury. So, kind of like a factual account, a chronological account of everything that happened during the crime and the investigation after the crime and the trial. And eventually, as I started to write more and more, I kind of got away from doing strictly historical nonfiction to historical fiction, because I could develop my characters a little bit better and use some of my imagination to bring on some dialogue and so forth. And every time I used any kind of dialogue, it was always based on some of the testimony that was given during the trial. It really helped in keeping the story flowing. It's really kind of an examination of all of the testimony, it's almost like putting a puzzle together, because there's no sense to it as far as what happened, when, where it happened. So it's really kind of bringing all the pieces together to tell the whole story in a logical way that flows for the reader. And as I kept doing it, I felt as though I was getting better at it, because I was getting a lot of comments from people saying, I like this because you kind of made the people come more alive, and it wasn't so basically just here's the story of the facts, this is what happened, one fact after another. So I really started to enjoy it, and I'm actually working on the 5th book now about an 1868 murder in Kingston, which I hope is going to be ready by the time we have the 300th anniversary, which is coming up, I think, in 2026. So it's been a lot of fun. Like I mentioned before, it's the research that I love. It's like detective work, and plus getting myself to sit down in front of the computer to keep writing is another story. That's always difficult. But sometimes you find yourself in a groove and keep going for a long time and keep the story going. And then there's other times when you hit a wall, you just can't do anything. But it's been fun, and I enjoy it. And what I enjoy most too is meeting a lot of people that come to different events that I speak at, and at book signings and so forth, and selling books here at the Halifax marketplace, and various farmers markets around the area. So it's been a lot of fun for me. I'll keep doing it as long as I can find an interest in doing it. And it's funny, it seems that I'm not running out of any possible subjects, because every time I look around, I find out about another murder that happened in Plymouth County. So maybe I'll have to go to another county. I don't know. We'll see.
John, writing these stories of the murders, doesn't that upset your sleep?
Not really. It's actually, number one, it's safer than what I was doing before. Number two, it's not anywhere near as personal, because I'm not actually witnessing what happened. So,
No, there's thoughts continuous thoughts about the murders on everything that you have to get, such as this one. To me, I would be awake all night. Make sure the lights are all on and everything else.
Yeah, no, it doesn't bother me. No, I kind of, because I had been in the business for so long, that was kind of like almost like a match to me, with loving local history and having that experience as a policeman, that I can kind of put my perspective and also, deal with, the violence and so forth that you're talking about. So it's not an issue for me, really.
So as a police department, I forgot that you're involved in that stuff all the time.
Yeah, a lot of experiences with different, violent events and murders and so forth, and not that you ever grow accustomed to it. I mean, it's still difficult to deal with, but it's not like I'm there to see now. I'm taking a step back. I'm doing it from the comfort of my home. You know, I'm doing writing, research, and so forth. So, it's funny you mentioned, you know, about dreams and so forth. But there's a house in Essex where I wrote the book about the murder of the Admiral in 1913. And there was a business actually operating in the house at that time. It's called Garden Craft, and I did a little signing there. And it was at Halloween, and they had one of those mannequins that moves. It's a witch's costume. They put one of my books in her hand, and she started screaming every time somebody walked by. But I was talking to some of the women that were working in the store, and they said, we're upstairs in the office upstairs, and we hear in the end, we hear footsteps from time to time. I think there's a ghost upstairs. Maybe it's the Admiral. Yes?
I've done a lot of research, and how did they pick the juries at that time with their questions? Because Massachusetts, at most of the time when you wrote, had the death penalty, and there were a lot of people who wouldn't convict somebody because they didn't believe in that.
That's true. That was always an issue. That case I mentioned to you about the 1845 case with the jury found him guilty of manslaughter. I think people at the time who were opposed to the death penalty were looking for someplace to put a reason to not convict and hang someone. So you're right. There were people who were in favor of the death penalty and people who were not, and it was a constant issue. I mean, even to this day, we talk about the death penalty. I don't think you'll ever see it come back in Massachusetts. I know there are still some states that do it, but yeah, it was always an issue in all these trials, and especially with the 1913 case of the woman who murdered her husband. The jury, in the Hingham case from 1857, before the Civil War, the wife was brought to trial and was convicted, but the jury would not convict her of first-degree murder. They did not want to send a woman to the gallows. They just didn't feel they could live with themselves if they did something like that. So, and of course, back in the day, it was all male jurors. Women weren't permitted to be jurors at that time until later on when they got the right to vote and so forth, all these other rights that they should have had long ago. Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes.
How old was William Sturtevant when
he was in his 20s. I believe he was in his 20s.
That picture. You just looked older at that picture. I was just trying to figure out his age.
Yeah. He, like I said, he was in trouble all the time. And obviously the grandmothers they weren't pleased with him. They wouldn't do anything for him. It's kind of a shame because if they had given him a little bit of money, maybe none of this would have happened. But you can imagine the shock in town. To think that 3 people were found murdered in the farmhouse there. I mean, this was always such a peaceful community. I mean, the whole area, Plymouth County and beyond, was always, you'd find this, a lot more violence in the urban areas, the city and so forth. Not in these rural areas where everybody knew one another and everyone got along. And the beauty too was, back in the day, was people were more willing to come forward with information to the police as they investigated crimes. People are a little more reluctant nowadays to do that, but it would certainly help to the police and people talking to them all the time and coming forward with information that they were able to solve these crimes. And then to find that shoe print, that still amazes me that they were able to match the patch of the guy's soul with the mud print that was in the trail. I've always wanted to go back to that trail. I guess it's kind of been blown over and so forth. Some people that have lived in that area still kind of have a vague idea of where it is. But from what I understand, Sturtevant had a hole in his pocket. He had a bunch of coins, and a lot of the coins were falling as he was running along the trail. They recovered a lot of those coins during the investigation. I'd love to go out there with a metal detector if anybody wants to join me and maybe find some of those coins.
I'm here to find the diamond necklace she's wearing in that.
When you were in the police force, were you in the detective division at that time?
I was in the detective division, yeah. I was on patrol, as I mentioned, for several years, and then I went into what we call anti-crime, which was plain clothes, trying to focus on high-crime areas. And then I became a member of the drug control unit and did some investigation, undercover work and so forth. And then I got promoted to sergeant and was placed in charge of a squad of my own, which was five men and myself. I think there might have been, I don't know how many different squads, quite a few squads of officers. There was 150 in the whole group, just focusing on drug activity in the city. And then I was promoted to lieutenant detective, and the police commissioner placed me in charge of the entire drug control unit. And one of his mandates was to improve our informant policy and some of the policies that we use for search warrant execution. We had an unfortunate incident happen during the execution of a search warrant in a house in Dorchester, and there was a Baptist minister who was in the house, and they raided the wrong house, and the man suffered a heart attack. And as a result of that, there was obviously a public outcry about, the police going into the wrong place and scaring this poor man, and him suffering a heart attack and dying. So, the police commissioner said to me, we've got to do something about strengthening our policies, search warrant execution, using informants. I mean, obviously, they hit this house because the informant gave them a description of where he went to buy the drugs and so forth. They misinterpreted what he said. They got the search warrant for a place that went through the wrong door. So that was one of my mandates when I took over, and I did that. I was commander of the drug control unit for 4 years, and when I completed that assignment, the police commissioner promoted me to superintendent, which is part of his command staff. There was at that time 5 superintendents that each had a bureau, like patrol, training, detectives, and so forth. So I was chief of detectives for 4 years. So that meant that I was in charge of all detectives throughout the city. So I did that for 4 years, and then I became his executive officer after a time, and then the commissioner came in and placed me in charge of night operations while he wasn't there during the nighttime hours. So I was in charge of patrol, investigation, and so forth that took place in the city. Nighttime hours.
When you were in the police force detectives, at the time, what years were you?
I actually started in the department in, maybe say, 1969. I got out of high school and became a police cadet, and I was there for 4 years, and then left for a time and came back and started in 1979 as a patrolman. And I retired in 2008.
When you were at the time in the detective division, the number of murders and what's going on today, it couldn't be anywhere like what's going on today. But the police today, they have murders every half hour somewhere. I can't understand how the detectives and how the ones involved in that can find the people they need, and they have them in court so quickly. What is it now that, well, when you see a murder now, and they're looking for the suspect, they don't know where he went. That's Monday. By Thursday, in the news, they already found him. They got him. They knew where he was. So what is it today that they can find these people so quickly? That's what I don't understand. Do you know?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different elements of how they can develop the case, and a lot of it has to do with information that's passed on to the police, either by willing or unwilling, informants, to an anonymous tip line, or even by using intelligence reports. They collect a lot of intelligence. They do it by association. They figure out relationships between people and so forth. A lot of it is, most of these murders are committed by people who know one another. So that's a big help. But more than anything else, there were quite a few murders back when I was a young policeman. There was a crack epidemic, and drugs fueled a lot of the violence that was going on with us. gang activity and so forth, but the forensic advances with DNA, I mean, that's huge. I talk to a lot of young people who want to get into police work, and I say, if you have any kind of a scientific mind and you really want to make a difference, look into becoming a forensic specialist, because it's amazing what they can do with that stuff now. I mean, I'm sure you all read about it in the newspapers about how they solve different crimes now, not only through DNA of the actual person who commits the crime, but by to relatives of theirs who have donated their DNA to a database in some of these companies like Ancestry and like that have these DNA programs. You can submit your DNA and get a profile of, your background and so forth, your history. So they're making connections with people who have contributed that DNA, and are related somehow to the suspect. They can show a connection, and then figure out the case, and then put supplemental further investigation to prove that a certain person did something. Any other questions?
Any other questions from anyone?
So no book on white bulge, right? Well, wait till
But the market is calling it white bulger. Whitey bulger, and because I was still a little young, I wasn't that advanced. I mean, I knew a lot of the policemen that used to investigate him and so forth. I was never really involved. I shouldn't say, not in a direct way. In an indirect way, I was involved in a lot of the drug activity that he controlled in a lot of the neighborhoods in the city. But actually investigating him, I wasn't so much directly involved. There's I mean, it was an interesting career. I loved it. I mean, and of course, you miss when all of you who have retired, you miss most of the people that you worked with. I mean, I got to work with so many terrific people, and we still see each other from time to time. But I really enjoyed working with everybody, and it was a rewarding career, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Today, I think it was just a one-of-a-kind job. I mean, how can you? You're pretty much your own boss out there on the street, right? Yeah. So it was interesting and rewarding. So, any other questions I can answer? I have my 4 books up here. If you want to take a look at them, my cards are there. Take a card. If you want to call me, you want to buy a book at some point, just give me a call or email me. My email address is on there, and also my web address. From my website. So, okay. Well, thank you very much.